Support Name Explain on Patreon for ad-free videos, exclusive podcasts and blog posts, and to help choose what names get explained. Click the link in the description. On the 13th of December 1642, a ship that set sail from modern-day Jakarta with the intentions of finding a southern sea route to Chile came across something they were not perhaps expecting. Aboard this ship was the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman, who is seen as being the first European to sight a landmass that no other European had laid eyes on. Tasman, however, thought that it was the south tip of South America he had spotted. It would come to light that this wasn't a part of the Americas, however, but a whole new land, which was eventually named after the Zeeland region of the Netherlands. Tasman was Dutch after all. The name of Nova Zealandia would eventually, however, get anglicised into the name New Zealand that we all know it as today, when the land became a formal British colony in 1840. And from this moment, New Zealand began to be shaped into the modern independent nation that it is to this day. Though while the dominant language of New Zealand may now be English, and its largest ethnic group be of European descent, a key element from New Zealand's history was missed off in that short history lesson. That being the fact that New Zealand already had a human population way before Abel Tasman sighted the land and the British claimed it as their own. These people obviously had their own language and names for places too. I'm of course talking about the Maori. The Maori are believed to have arrived in New Zealand over 1,000 years ago. Though other sources pinpoint their arrival to the early to mid 14th century, they are believed to have arrived from their mythical homeland, known as Hawaii. They are of course a Polynesian people, relating to other peoples from Polynesia like the Samoans, Tahitians and even native Hawaiians. It's believed they arrived from the islands of New Zealand via long sea travels in boats called wakas. While we don't know their exact origins, what we darn well know for sure is that they have been in the lands way before any Europeans, and they still live in the lands today. According to Wikipedia, there are over 775,000 Maori people living in New Zealand today. That equates to 1 in 7 Kiwis identifying as Maori. Maori society is broken down into social units which are called iwis, and while it seems that different iwis all speak the same Maori language, they may use some different names for various places, as we shall see. Speaking of language, that is also simply called Maori too. It is also known as Te Reo, simply meaning the language. Like the people, this is a Polynesian language, with its closest relative being the likes of Tahitian. This language has gone on a bit of a roller coaster. Unsurprisingly, when the English set up shop on the island, English became the dominant language and the native Maori tongue started to die off. Luckily, however, in the 1980s, the language and Maori culture as a whole saw something of a revival, meaning more people started to once again learn and talk the language. It was in 1987 that Maori became an official language in New Zealand along with English. Today, there are believed to be around 50,000 people who can speak the language well. This revival of the tongue has meant that more Maori place names are starting to become commonplace, including with the geography of the land. Let's cover the geography of the land, shall we? New Zealand is of course an island nation. It is primarily comprised of 2 main islands. However, there are many small islands too with varying degrees of habitability. While many of these islands look incredible, their names aren't as impressive. The main culprits in all of this are of course those 2 largest islands. They are officially called in English North Island and South Island. This is because one is in the north and the other is in the south. Like I said, these are really not the most exciting of names to talk about. And likewise, many of the smaller islands have pretty mundane names of equally mundane origins. Luckily, however, they are only the names that have been thrust upon these islands by European settlers. Thankfully, the native Maoris gave these islands much more exciting and vibrant names that also tie into their own history and culture. And while these names are incredible, they can also prove tricky to pronounce, especially if you're like myself and struggle to say words in your native language correctly. So I just want to say my usual apology for my inevitable butchering of some or all of these place names. Despite what it sounds like, I do check how to pronounce these names. The great website of Forvo is my usual site of choice when it comes to pronunciation. However, I often still get these wrong. If you are annoyed with how I say things, please take these steps. Check out how the word is written on the screen, try and pronounce it yourself, and then check how to pronounce it correctly online. If all of these fail to satisfy you, then, and only then, may you go to abuse me down in the comment section. Okay? Cool. Also, it's worth mentioning that while New Zealand is believed to consist of roughly 600 islands, I definitely will not be explaining 600 names. Instead, I'm going to focus on just a small handful of islands, primarily the islands with sizable populations. If you happen to be watching from one of those islands, then please do let me know down below. If we are looking at the more populated islands of New Zealand, then there's no better place to start than North Island, the most populated island of all of New Zealand, being home to just under 4 million people. Obviously, this name simply comes from the fact that it's more northern of the two main islands, and if I had to say anything about this name, well, I'll say it gets the job done, that's for sure. Luckily, where the Europeans failed to give this island the cool name, the Maori language succeeded. In Maori, the island is called Te Ika a Maui. I did warn you these names would be tricky for me to say. This name means the fish of Maui and relates to one of the many stories about the Maori mythological figure of Maui. This demigod plays a central role in Maori culture, so this definitely won't be the last we hear of him. In one story, he snuck under the floorboards of his brother's canoe as he was not allowed to go fishing with them. Once they were out at sea, not only did he reveal himself, but he also revealed his hook, made from the jawbone of an ancestor. He threw his hook into the ocean's depths and before too long, realized he had something on the line. He pulled and pulled on his catch, and upon reaching the water's surface, Maui and his brothers found that it was not a fish at all but a huge piece of land. Nevertheless, he caught it with his fishing hook, so it was still dubbed a fish. This quote-unquote fish of Maui was the North Island, hence why it bears that name in Maori. Despite being way bigger, South Island has a far smaller population, with just under 1.2 million people calling it home. The island's official Maori name is Te Waiponamu. This name is believed to mean either the place of greenstone or the waters of greenstone. Either way, it relates to greenstone. Greenstone is a highly valued mineral in New Zealand for the Maori people, often carved into pendants and necklaces. It's incredibly pretty looking, and I can understand why it'd be so valued. Though you may remember I mentioned that different iwis sometimes use different names for places. This has led to the South Island have a second Maori name too, that second name being Te Waka a Maui. Two of these words I've already mentioned. We have Maui the demigod once again, and Waka, as we said, is a type of Maori canoe. This name simply means Maui's canoe, and the legend goes that this island is actually the remains of the canoe Maui and his brothers use on their fishing trips, and of course the one they used to lift the northern island out the sea with. I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that these names are just a little bit more interesting than North and South Island. And despite how long these names have been around for, they only became official names for these islands in 2013. As we depart from these two islands, the population drops greatly. New Zealand's third most populated island has a population of just under 10,000. Thankfully for us, however, this island has one name, and that's its Maori name of Waiheke. While this is a Maori name, it was adapted by Europeans. Initially, the Maori name was Motu Waiheke, and Europeans simplified it into just Waiheke. This name means island of trickling water, which relates to the geography of the island. Though even before it had this name, the Maori of the island supposedly had a completely different Maori name, that being Te Motu Aotearoa. This name means the long sheltering island, which once again must relate to what the island is like. Populations drop even further with the Great Barrier Island, which has a population of just 850 or so. This island was named by none other than Captain James Cook himself. He named this island as it served as something of a barrier from the harsher waters of the Pacific Ocean. This name is pretty plain and descriptive. However, the Maori name for the island is also pretty descriptive too. As in Maori, the island is called Aotearoa, which means white cloud. It got this name in the language as to the people on the larger islands. This small island looked like little more than a white cloud far off in the distance. The Chatham Islands lie off the eastern coast of New Zealand's South Island. While they are a collection of islands, its largest island is simply called Chatham Island. This European name comes from the HMS Chatham, the boat that first surveyed these islands. This island does have a Maori name, Wakuri. This means curry house, and why it has this name we don't seem to be too sure. However, what's more interesting about this island is that's the homeland of the Moriori people. The Moriori are a much smaller native tribe who are believed to have originated from the Maori of New Zealand who sailed to the Chatham Islands to live in further isolation. This allowed them to become a distinct group of people with their own language. Unfortunately, however, their numbers are much smaller than that of the Maori, with there supposedly being around just 700 of them. In the Maori language, the island is called Rikohu, meaning misty skies. This name comes from the fact that it's around these islands the cold Antarctic waters meet warmer waters, meaning mist is created in the skies. A much prettier name in my opinion, as opposed to being named after a silly old boat. At New Zealand's southern tip we have Stewart Island, the nation's third largest island, though it only has a population of around 400. This island is obviously named after someone called Stewart. In this case, however, Stewart was a last name. William Stewart was a sailor who helped charter this land. Not the finest name origin. Its Maori name of Aotearoa, however, means glowing skies. This is a reference to the southern lights that can be viewed all the way down there. And while this might be what the specific islands of New Zealand are called by the Maoris, what about the entire nation itself? Surely they are not calling it New Zealand. Well, of course they're not. The Maori name for the nation as a whole is Aotearoa. This name was supposedly once just for the North Island, but has since gone on to refer to the entire nation. Several translations as to what this means has been suggested, but the most popular idea is that it means land of the long white cloud. The reason the Maori have given it this name is supposedly because of cloud formations that the Maori people used in the past to help with navigating these islands they call home. Or Kainga, I ought to say, as that's the Maori word for home. The islands of New Zealand were suggested by Wendy A. Chavez, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saint of the islands of New Zealand. Do you have a good idea for somewhere that's name could be covered in a Name Explain video? If so, then please consider donating on Patreon. Just $1 a month helps keep the channel running and earns you a weekly chance to suggest somewhere to be turned into a video, and you too could be a Name Explain Patreon saint. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Patreon is vital to Name Explain, and donating just $2 a month allows you to enjoy ad-free videos and bonus Patreon exclusive content. It also allows you to help choose what names get explained in upcoming videos, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you so much for all the support you guys give Name Explain. Thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Check out another video and subscribe to stay in the loop on all things Name Explain. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram where I'm Name Explain YT, and also join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain, both of which will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.